So, Rick, over the years, you've met with over 700 inventors or problem solvers. What have you noticed about the inventors that go on to become the CEO?
Very rare. People that have the qualities of being a fantastic problem solver frequently are very independent, get on and solve the problem themselves, and frequently are not real people. You can use that expression.
Yeah.
You know, they're not into team sports and they're into going off and solving the problem themselves. So that's one of the cardinal problems. That's the problem that I had personally. So even though I did eventually run a 50-person company, and you could say that I was successful compared to somebody who's a professional business person, you know, I'm a joke next to them. So when I did Unilock with my friend Craig Etchegoyen, he came in within 3 months, had done what I'd taken years to do. And he was just so comfortable with it. And a lot of what he did, I didn't understand. And so it just made me really, really conscious of the differences in capabilities. And you can't be great at everything, you know, so you've got to pick your punches. And problem solvers have a wonderful gift in that they have been able to solve a problem, or they're willing to, you know, dive in and solve something that's really important to a group of people like themselves, and really go out on a limb to make sure it happens. And so that should be supported in its own right.
So what sort of role do you suggest to the problem solvers that they take once their projects become successful or they've reached that commercialization stage?
Well, you know, I am very careful not to speak for people out of turn, but for myself, I've always maintained a position that I either lead the initial technological drive of the company that's been started and solve problems from an early stage, from a prototype point of view, but not try and get into the production side, the marketing side, not try to get in other areas of the business. And the fact is that because you're the person that really starts the project, that generally people give you a level of esteem that means that you are quite valuable to the company ongoing. But speaking for myself, I've found that within a couple of years, once you start bringing in experts in their field, that they all start to replace you. But that's probably what the whole point of having a great team around you is, that they put you out of a job, you know. You know.
That's good to know. Thank you. Good answer. So is the Office for Innovation mainly designed with investors in mind or with problem solvers in mind?
Well, actually, it's interesting you say that, but it's really about the problem itself. It's about nurturing the problem itself and bringing the best value for everybody that contributes. So even though problem solvers are the ones that actually dig out and find a way of addressing a particular problem, it's really important for them to know their value and what their contribution is, and then be able to hand off to business people once the idea is formed and it's getting ready for the next stage, which is commercialization. So, you know, if the idea is important, if it really is valuable to a group of people, either highly valuable to a small group of people or valuable to a large number of people, then, you know, it's worth chasing up. It's worth following through on. So investors are very important in the whole success formula. In my experience, there's 3 elements of success. There's one, a great idea with a clear protected technology, core technology. 2, execution, which is the business people that actually take the idea and make it happen. And thirdly, the funding, which makes the whole thing, it greases the rails. You know, that's in my experience, that's what funding does. There are bootstrappers that actually have been successful, and, you know, great, good on them, but the amount of the quality of entrepreneurial spirit you need, and the traits, the characteristics that you have to be able to pull that off, means that your chances of getting the idea to fruition are limited if you don't at some stage get the help of funding. So it's just really important to understand your limitations and to make sure that everything is utilized in the most efficient way to work around not only your strengths, but your weaknesses, and the strengths and weaknesses of your business partner who actually does the execution, and that the money people are supportive, you know, of what you're trying to achieve, because the aim of the whole thing is to get it, the project, into the hands of the people that need it, and to get rewards back to the people who made it happen. So the 3 people that made it happen are the person that came up with the idea, the people that have put their heart and soul into making the business successful, and the financial reward for the investors that have put their money where their mouth is.
So can you talk a little bit about that second group, the professional managers who come in, and you talked about how they ideally kind of replace the problem solver, the inventor, with their professional skills. So what do they bring to the table that the inventor can't or doesn't have?
Well, one of the things that is really critical is that eventually you will have to go to people for money. And people with money are always interested in the initial idea. You know, I've met so many investors that have said, "Oh, what are you doing now, Rick? What interesting thing have you got up your sleeve?" You know, and the problem is that they're really interested in hearing about a great technology, but then the next thing that goes through their mind is, this guy has invented 50 things. How can he be an expert in 50 industries, in 50 markets? And so even though a person can solve a problem in a particular field or for a particular technology, it doesn't mean that they can run a business that solves that problem. And on the other side of it, because the pool of people that have had experience in business and work in that industry is so much larger, then you can actually find business partners, co-founders. I tend to find co-founders more than business partners who know the value of the product or the technology that you've come up with. They know the customers that it's going to go to. They're confident about what needs to be done with the product, and they have a clear path forward. But that also means that when they go and talk to the investors, that the investors are suddenly going, "Oh, we're not talking to the propeller head anymore. We're talking to somebody who's done this before or has some business knowledge." And when they come back, they speak in terms that investors can understand, you know, return on investment, how long to break even, what's the cap table going to look like, all of those things, which actually, when I use the expression greasing the rails of success, that's what happens, because in effect, you're using your co-founders' experience and their ability to express the project in terms of normal business frameworks as a way of being a due diligence for the investors, because otherwise they'd have to do that themselves, and they'd have to dig into the problem solver's lack of, you know, knowledge in that space. So, for example, in myself, I know cryptography really well. I know various languages of software. I've delved into shark remediation. I've delved into sonar. I've delved into all kinds of different things. But for me to sit there with a straight face and say to somebody who wants to invest in one of those projects that I'm not only am I a expert at solving the problem, but I'm an expert in that industry and I know how it works, you know, tell him he's dreaming. But if I work with somebody who's known in the industry, in my situation, in fact, I always look for co-founders that are at my pay grade or above in terms of their business experience and nous. And so even if somebody is, you know, only starting out, say, for example, they're working on a fireproof system for cars, right? Bushfire remediation for cars. Then to find somebody who's in the fire industry, who actually sells fire extinguishers or something like that, who knows the industry, knows the fire, the fire infrastructure people and everything like that, that's not too hard because there's literally thousands of them. And for an investor to look at the business person's experience is so much easier. But then when they look at the solution and they see, oh, then they got a patent for it, then, you know, suddenly all the ingredients are there for success. So it's an interesting mix combination that what's happened in the past, people have tried to take shortcuts. Problem solvers go, oh, I'll learn how to be a business person. Or business people kind of go, oh, I think I can solve this problem. I'll just get someone technical to solve it. You've got to actually, in my experience, you've got to deal with the reality of the qualities of the people that are great at their individual skills and then combine them, you know. So, you know, that's what I found about investors. I've met so many of them, they're so enthusiastic about ideas, but when it comes to actually the point of signing the check, they're thinking, can I picture this person running a $30 million business or selling a $30 million business or a $20 million business or a $50 million business? If you ask that about propeller heads, you're really asking for a long shot. Most propeller heads I know are really open books, a real question mark whether they could do that, you know. And it's interesting, you know, people quote people like Steve Jobs, you know, or Bill Gates, and kind of say, well, they did it. But frequently, as we've seen in both those cases, the propeller head was actually their business partner in the early days. You know, they're the ones that are actually doing the technical work. Steve Wozniak was doing with Steve Jobs, and Steve had understanding, but he was thinking business all the time. He was really focused on business, even though compared to the business people that he brought in later, he was far less experienced. But you know, 2 companies later, he became one of the most experienced business people ever in history. So, you know, after Pixar and then going back to Apple. So, you know, it's underscoring the fact that people that can actually solve problems can eventually end up being great business people. But in both cases, you've got Steve Wozniak and Paul Allen, who both kind of really enjoyed the technical side of things, but as it became more of a business, they just didn't really enjoy it that much, you know, and they found a way to back out. And I'd say that most Australian problem solvers that I've met, they'd love to be, you know, have all the resources and have all the success of somebody like a Steve Jobs. But the fact is, they're a lot closer to being a poor cousin Steve Wozniak or, Paul Allen.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So why do projects in the Office for Innovation stop at prototype stage rather than going on to commercialization?
The reason is that that's the point where the inclusion of a business co-founder, or where the inventor / problem solver needs to make a decision to change hats. That's where a change of hat occurs. Mm-hmm. So you've actually bundled up the idea, the concept, into a demonstrable package. You've got a great idea, documented it, patented it, at least a provisional patent, and a prototype, and then a very basic business plan to kind of get an idea of what you would want to do with the project. And at that point, you have to start making decisions that are to do with commercialization. And you need to put a different hat on, have a different skill set for that. So the reason why the Office for Innovation stops at that point is so that other processes can start. So either the co-founder takes over, the business co-founder takes over, you start funding for commercialization, not funding for research and development, which is the Office of Innovation's prime mandate in terms of investment, trying to help investment for R&D purposes, not for commercialization. And so at that point, it's either help the inventor to work out and verify that they are capable of doing the business side of their invention, or help them find a co-founder that is as good quality as they can get to kick off the commercialization. And that also is an interesting time because there's lots of facilities, there's lots of organizations that can start to help at that time, because investors are a lot more comfortable about talking about commercialization because you have a business plan, you know what markets you're going after, you know what the product configuration is going to look like and what the business model could be. So all of those things make an investor a lot happier. So it's actually one of the hardest things about the Office for Innovation, is that the investor pool we're finding have to be a combination of not only wanting a return, an early stage return, but also they have to have a philanthropic attitude towards what they're doing, because if you're just formulating the way the technology will work or the problem will be solved, then it's really too premature to be expecting how to make money out of it. You just got to see the potential in the thing and know that it's going to have enough room in there to allow you to make a decent return on your investment.
I remember you've talked about an unknown journey as the journey of the investor to some extent. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I have a lot of empathy for investors at that stage. In fact, for me personally, I allocate between $40,000 and $300,000 of my own funds for my own inventions, because I would never expect an investor to come in to something and to start to support something that there's a question mark as to whether it will work or not. So I personally don't have the freedom to be able to go and ask hat in hand for help with any of my inventions. But as soon as I know that the project is actually doable and can prove it, demonstrate it, either to somebody who's fluent in the industry that I'm working in or is an expert in the field, and demonstrate to them that what I'm doing is a valuable solution, then from that point on, I'm actually much more comfortable about having investors involved. Unfortunately, most inventors, most problem solvers don't have that luxury. You know, they're actually working on weekends and spending evenings that should be allocated to their families. You know, they're sharing their passion for the problem solving with their families. You know, and I'll re-explain that. They're having their family share their lives with their, you know, inventions and their problems solvings. Don't really. Can you ask the question again?
Yeah, what I asked was, why do projects in the Office for Innovation stop at prototype stage rather than going on to commercialization?
Yeah. You actually asked something else, didn't you?
Yeah, maybe I did. It might have been a follow-up. So let's.
Sorry, you better follow up on that. That was interesting. It made me think. It was making me think. So I was trying to answer while I was thinking about it. Yeah, I think the question was something along the lines.
Oh, the unknown journey.
Yeah, it was the unknown journey, and that. So that's the point I was making, is that as Ric Richardson, who's known for being quite successful as an inventor, it's a bit unfair for me to go out and expect investors to fund pure R&D for me. You know, the assumption is that I'd have the resources to do that. And in fact, I do allocate between $40,000 and $300,000 for each of my inventions. Just to let you know, like I've got 50 at the moment. 50 inventions at the moment, of which only probably about 6 or 7 of them are actually allocated for particular companies. So, you know, there's lots of stuff sitting out there in the ether. Can't help yourself. When you're an inventor, you're always coming up with something. But the problem is that most inventors don't have that luxury. And so they're spending family resources, they're spending time that they should be with their family, because there's no other facility out there to, you know, help them solve this problem. And for most inventors, if they're like me, most problem solvers like me, it's an itch you have to scratch. And so what ends up happening is that you know, the project takes much longer to get going. The person is always struggling to try and make it happen. And so the Office for Innovation is an interesting attempt to try and make that turn that capability into a day gig, into a day job, and allow them to get back to spending some weekends with their family, and make a real focused effort. And that, in fact, is modeled on what happened with the Office, the Office for Science, Research and Development, the OSRD, in the United States, when they were getting ready for the Second World War. And also the Bell Labs is another example of it, where corporate resources were used to sponsor problem solvers who worked full-time at problem solving. And they didn't put, you know, give the problem solvers direction. They just picked really good quality people and let them follow their problems. And out of that came solar panels, mobile phones, you know, like so many of the technology it actually started with radar. The OSRD actually started with radar. So, you know, microwave radar. So really, those examples are inspirational, and also the OSRD, the Office for Scientific Research and Development, is actually a precursor part of the model that we've had for the Office for Innovation.
Mm. And so how does the Office for Innovation actually allow those problem solvers to make it a day job?
Well, we just in putting it together, the team and I realized that there are so many resources out there which are not utilized properly for the Australian situation. And those things are, one, I think it's a wonderful thing that the ATO supplies the RDTI, the Research and Development Tax Incentive, which not many people appreciate. That not only does it give tax advantage to big companies that do R&D for the benefit of a whole industry, but it also allows advance payments to anybody who does R&D that ends up benefiting the whole industry. And their criteria for how that works is for the R&D they're doing to eventuate in a patent. So that's kind of gives you an idea, even though it doesn't require that. The fact that that's what it's aiming towards means that it's pushing towards a situation where an industry can benefit from someone's problem-solving capabilities. So that's one thing, but there is a problem with that, in that the way the ATO has set that up is that you can't get the funds from it until after you've spent them. So the next problem we wanted to solve with the Office is to bridge finance that tax incentive. So that surprisingly is 40% of all your R&D costs. And so when you think about somebody working full-time on solving a problem, at least 90 to 95% of it is pure R&D. It's either prototyping, working on patents, documenting ideas, documenting why things failed, documenting things that blew up, all of that kind of stuff. And so only about 5% would be admin. So, you're talking at least 35 to 40% of the cost of the whole project being funded by the Australian government, which is, I'm so proud of being an Australian when I hear that. That's really great. And how many of the problem solvers in Australia are availing themselves of that? Zero. Then the next thing is, if the problem solver has a clear path to follow, and there's a bit of structure to what they're doing, it makes it a lot easier for friends and family to see the possible success of the project. So the next thing is to give friends and family who would love to support their uncle or their husband or their dad or their son, right? They'd love to put some money in to see their project success. When there's a structure around what they're doing, and they know that they're only looking to fund, half or less of the cost of the project, then the likelihood that the problem solver can get support from their own microcosm of supporters is much higher. And then for the remaining funding, which is angel investors or professional investors, then you've got the most highest value situation, because they're not funding the whole thing. They're only funding, the remainder, and their risk is being assuaged by the fact that there's this structure in place, so that they know that there are guidelines, principles, frameworks that are going to protect them from the downside, which is the office does a lot of great little things, like, for example, it enables the problem solver to off-ramp. If the project's not successful, then they try and help the problem solver make sure that they've got enough funding to gently off-ramp out of their project, so they get enough time to be able to get back into the industry with a full-time job. Situations like that. And it minimizes the amount of exposure to the investor. But also just the way the ATO, RDTI compliance works is a wonderful safeguard, in that you really have got to be doing fairly serious projects to be eligible for the RDTI funding, which in and of itself makes it really valuable. You know, the fact that once a person starts in this program, your confidence level that it's either important enough to run the risk of possibly losing the funds at some time, but you also have seen that the government step in to help, and you've also seen the friends and family get in and help. So, you know, the hedges, the bet you're making is really hedged as much as possibly it can. But that's, in the end, in our experience of the Office for Innovation, is that the investors are the hardest. It's the hardest role for us to find candidates for, because it's a sub segment of all angel investors, and angel investors have got a high risk tolerance already. To then come along and ask them to invest in something where they don't even know what an ROI is going to be is a big ask. So we've got to go in with our eyes open, knowing that we're actually asking quite a bit of an investor to do that.
You mentioned the Australian Tax Office's R&D tax incentive program as funding 40% of the eligible costs. So what are some of those costs that it funds?
Everything to do with R&D. So all of the wages and office expenses, things like that, for R&D purposes. So if you're renting a garage to do you know, some machining or 3D printing, that comes off the cost.
Right.
So in fact, at that early stage, the whole company is purely for that purpose. So all the costs related to that, only thing that doesn't really qualify is things like admin, you know, having a secretary to do your bookkeeping, things like that, right? Because that's admin work surrounding your actual R&D work. So, but you know, somebody who's involved in working on a new technology invention or an innovation, all of their experiments, all of their equipment, their computers, their any consulting they needed for prototyping, all of those kind of things, all the patent costs, patent filing, all of those things, they're directly RDTI compliant.
Brilliant. These projects in the Office for Innovation are all pre-commercialisation. What makes them attractive to an investor? Is there any kind of discount on account of the risk? Well,
the fact is that you're coming in at the very earliest stages on a project. So you've got the maximum bang for your buck in terms of the every dollar invested. Later on, you've got to you'll have to be diluted by the fact that you'll have business execution people involved, you'll have other investors involved, and so even though it's the single biggest opportunity for return, it's probably the highest risk that the company will ever face. Because after that, you've got some track record of progress that can actually be brought into the equation. At this time, you're making a decision purely based on the ability of the problem solver and the scope of the problem they're solving, and your initial assessment of the approach that they're going to try to achieve during their during their research and development.
And the fact that the R&D tax incentive looks after 40% of the costs, that's a benefit to the investor on an important level, isn't it?
Well, yeah, all of those things are the RDTI tax incentive, the bridging finance for that incentive, the friends and family round, which is usually low cost to the problem solver. They're friends and family. Usually it's interest free. Sometimes they might charge interest. Sometimes they insist that they want to pay interest. But the thing is, by the time that last percentage is being looked for, the problem solver has demonstrated every proof that they can possibly bring to the table that they have done everything they possibly can before that happens.
Will the Office for Innovation play a role in commercializing projects once there is a prototype and a patent?
Yeah, well, the time between the patent and commercialization usually includes some kind of prototyping and at least preliminary assessment of market opportunities, right? Which is, it's not commercialization, but it is working out product configurations. What ways can the core technology be turned into products that could be turned into commercialization? And that is where you start to make a decision which direction the project is going to go in for commercialization. And that's where you're given an opportunity. That's where you're given an opportunity to find a prospective co-founder. And you also know what targets you have in terms of possible exits in the future for commercialization. So, for example, I'm working in the space of an operating system hardening technology to fight malware. The obvious exits are all the operating system companies. So you've got Red Hat with IBM for Linux, you've got Apple, you've got Microsoft, you've got Cisco for internet routers and for infrastructure operating systems. So you know exactly what companies will end up owning the technology. And you also then know what kind of what pool of experts you need to look at in terms of co-founders. So, in that situation where I'm looking for a business co-founder is, people that have come, that are either in those industries, have worked with those companies, may have sold a company to those companies already and already done that process. So the same happens with even a small project in the OFI. You're just looking for those opportunities to, once the commercialization process starts, to make sure you have the right person as your co-founder, and you've picked a direction that makes sense from the very first step in that direction.
So that's good for investors and the problem solver to know, is that at the end of the prototype stage, things don't fall off a cliff. There's a kind of a assistance with the next step.
Yeah, in fact, we haven't discussed it much in the OFI team yet, but in fact, we haven't done our job if we haven't found a business partner for each of our candidates, unless we've helped them work out that they are in fact capable of doing the business themselves. So the idea is to get people to either confront the fact that they would be much better off by sticking to their knitting, as I often explain that if you're a problem solver, then you'll be much happier if you just stick with solving the problem and then following that direction even through into commercialization, where you're the one that actually I hope you can cut this out, where you're the one that takes responsibility for the core product idea, the core technology. That's the way I've operated with the 4 companies I've done since Unilock started. That's the same role I've always had.
Brilliant. What would you say is different about the Office for Innovation?
It's really important to think about the standard entrepreneurial path that the world thinks of. Because when you think of even in the UK, in the States, which is in especially the West Coast, you've got very literate, very comfortable in presenting their ideas. You've got, entrepreneurial. There's a showmanship that entrepreneurs have. That is a prerequisite of people that are successful in that space. But also the tendency is for people to think about what need is out there in the marketplace and then work back from that. That's an entrepreneurial view of the world. Over the years since 2010, I started helping inventors and problem solvers in Australia. I realized that Australians are very different to that. They're really a different animal. They're not entrepreneurs in the Western US sense. They tend to be more, garage scientists and experimenters and, tinkering away in their spare rooms and stuff. And they tend to be very independent, coming up with unusual solutions for almost, sometimes it's comedic, how unbelievably simple they are that they come up with. I helped a lady who uses pool noodles to help aged care facilities make sure that people don't have their hips broken by falling out of bed of a night.
Right.
They sound like practical. That sounds like a really practical, straightforward invention, but it's the kind of thing that just happens when an everyday Australian uses their great creativity and has a genuine concern for the people in that situation. And they are not celebrated the same way as, West Coast entrepreneurs are, that want to do the next, Tinder or app of some sort, and it's interesting that it's there's a lot of more selflessness in it, in the Australian style of problem solving. Interestingly, there's a really interesting Freakonomics podcast that shows that actually in the United States there's a culture of at-home inventors, literally tens of thousands of them. But Australians tend to be that style predominantly. You also see it in universities. You also see it where, people have got a thesis that they're working on specific research, but they've also got passions that they're interested in because they want to go out and actually solve problems. So the Office for Innovation is designed to help those people who don't know how to do an entrepreneurial pitch. They're not hustling to just make a success. They're not motivated by money. They'd love to be able to make a living from their expertise, but they're not out there telling everybody they're going to be a billionaire. They're just solving the problem.
Brilliant. Perhaps last question. In what way, if any, is the Office for Innovation a reflection of you?
Well, probably what started the whole thing was that I wrote a book for me to use personally to document the steps in how invention is done. Because the first few times I invented things, I just did it instinctively. But I found myself reviewing the steps and realizing that I was making mistakes. So I started to document for myself, how that worked. And it ended up in this nine-step process, which I then wrote out as a book, really just to second guess myself. But it turned out that it became popular amongst the people that I helped with their own inventions. And so then, over the last 13 years, I've been helping, hundreds of people with their inventions. But, it feels like I'm boiling the ocean because I'm just Ric on Friday mornings, helping people one at a time to get their, inventions move forward, So when the opportunity came up to do the office, it was a bunch of good friends that I've worked with over the years, people that are interested in helping other problem solvers who also have contributed their own flavor to the mix because they themselves have become supporters of the people that we are trying to help. And so what ended up happening, instead of it just being Ric's 9-step plan, it's people volunteering to help try and find funding for the R&D tax incentive, for the I've got a mental block. People trying to help with the financing of the RDTI funding. We've got one of our supporters is very connected to the venture community. So he gives us insight onto how we can present ourselves to possible angel investors. We've got marketing experts like yourself, and and just really kind, supportive volunteers who have a wonderful self-sacrificing spirit, who just want to get in and see some of our problem solvers have the success that we'd all like to have for them.
Brilliant. So you've found a way to make it writ large rather than just a 9-step plan.
Yeah, it's a way to amplify the learnings. That a lot of it is initiated by myself, but everybody in the group is, to some degree, experienced what I've experienced, which is that Australians are a different character. There's something missing if you try and apply the standard US entrepreneurial framework to it, so incubators and startup innovation centers, all of those kind of things, they assume that the problem solver has, a hustle mentality, that they're entrepreneurial in their spirit. Australians don't tend to be that way. You could call what they're doing entrepreneurial, but in reality, they are very serious about solving the problem, and generally so unskilled in terms of pitch and presentation and selling themselves. They're all about the nuts and bolts of actually getting the thing done. So we're trying to, with the OFI, we're trying to fill in those gaps and add frameworks to and systems to bolster them and to stop them from allowing the weaknesses of a traditional Australian situation to get in the way of what's really valuable, which is having the problem solved and then turning it into a business that benefits as many people as possible. Australia first, and then possibly the world.
Beautiful. Sounds like a good place to stop. That's wonderful, Ric. Wonderful stuff.
Thanks, mate. Thanks.
Happy for me to press stop on recording.
Yep.
Andrew,
Man, if I get something out of
mate.
that.
All good. There's lots of